Hi, this is Barry Drudge, and this is my lecture for Spalding University. It's entitled Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow, The Craft of Time in Fiction. Stories are shaped by the presence of time around them. As an example, I want to tell you a story that you may know, a true story, but we're using it as an example. A young boy is abandoned by his father and mother and left with a stodgy old aunt, who only wants the best for the boy, but it's a rather strict existence because she wants him to succeed in life. As a teenager, he's reacquainted with his mother, who then subsequently is killed shortly after a reacquaintance by an off-duty police officer. The young boy is the first person on the scene and identifies the body at the scene of the crime or the accident. And this makes him very angry. He becomes so angry that he drops out of school. He takes up music, thinking that he's going to be in a band and make money at that, which at that point in time in England in the late 1950s was very unheard of. And yet he persevered, developed relationships, and played, to the point where they got a record contract, and a small record contract, but it caused them to become one of the biggest bands in the world. One of the most famous and most prolific songwriters and singers. But there's more. During the period of time as the creative peak was rising up, the man divorced his British wife, married a Japanese avant-garde artist, and the two of them went around the world promoting peace, trying to create communication. His songs had changed at that point, to the point where all of a sudden he was dissatisfied with any of that and retired from music to be a house husband and father to his second child. But wait, there's even more. A few years later, he decided, after some inspiration, to become a songwriter again. He started writing songs. He decided to record an album, and it started to take off again, kind of a realizing of his life. And sadly, he was shot to death right outside his home in New York City. So I have introduced to you in 3 paragraphs the story of John Lennon. This illustrates the concept of what portions we might use to tell the story, where the author decides to start and finish her story, decides what the point is. As baseball player Yogi Berra used to say, it ain't over until it's over. And that is one of the storyteller's dilemmas. Where do I begin? And when is it over? As writers, we often have vague ideas of how much time we want to cover in our work. How much time our stories cover has everything to do with what our story means. For instance, when someone tells us of a local event, a bad, meandering, and vague storyteller will have us demanding that he get to the point, whereas a good storyteller will have us begging for more information. This shows where technique is needed, and not every story is successful with the same technique. If done well, we can believe that our character has been through 40 years of life in the 6 hours it took us to read the work. We really, as writers, can cut or slow or speed up time. We need to keep in mind as writers that time is always, in some way, the subject of fiction. Soren Kierkegaard, from his diary, says, "It is quite true what philosophy says, that life must be understood backwards. But that makes one forget the other saying that it must be lived forwards. The more one ponders this, the more it comes to mean that life in the temporal existence never becomes quite intelligible, precisely because at no moment can I find complete quiet to take the backward-looking position. In crafting fiction, we can create a stopping point from which life can have some meaning, or as Kierkegaard put it, making it intelligible. Space can create a moment of introspection, the very thing that writers use for understanding. The writer's story is finished before the reader even has the opportunity to read it. In my investigation of time in fiction, I've encountered some terminology which I did not invent, but it gives us a wonderful opportunity to see the many options of how to frame our story. Joan Silber parses them in a basic few categories, looking at 1, classic time, which is a brief natural span of a month, a year, or a season, most commonly approached with summary and scene. Long time, which spans decades or lifetimes. Switchback time, moving between past and present. Slowed time, with brief instances in detail. And fabulous time, which just basically indicates something that's very fantastic in science fiction and fantasy, where unrealistic time spans may develop and be. A little water helps. Yet, there are more approaches than I currently have in the half hour to talk about with time. Author Mark Curry, in his book entitled About Time, declares when we think that narratives are not about time, we are accepting the way that conventional narrative temporality has embedded a certain view of time in our universe. It is important to see all fiction as fiction about time. The fascinating reality is that plot is often underpinned with the notion of remembering, forgetting, or wasting time, as well as those who toy with time's rules. Cultures regard times in different ways, as well as the finality of death, which may not be the finality of time itself. Of all the writer's choices, deciding the story's time arc can be the least thought out. My lecture is designed to be a set of tools for your toolbox, covering options and opportunities you have on presenting the story that's burning in your soul. I have a hand here somewhere, your soul. There we go. Let's talk about classic time, shall we? In the books that I love, I can tell you great details, themes, plots, and literary devices without having given much thought to the scheme of time. This, like with many writers, is simply because time is written in such a manner that it doesn't jump out at us. It only does that when something unusual is done with it. As Silber writes and Mark Curry echoes, classic time is the default mode of most of the 20th and 21st centuries. It is what most modern fiction writers use as its time mode. It's almost like a default. While the craft of writing tends to focus on scene and its weaker brother, summary, classic time is placing the entirety within the bounds of a single year or season. F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby only covers a single summer, a fact I missed when I was 9 years old and attempting to read it while the movie was first big in 1973. Sunshine glimmers, stings, and diminishes in its storyline. As the Long Island houses close for the end of the season, Gatsby is laid to rest. In between are 121 pages, packed pages, full of all the Roaring Twenties antics that keep the readers riveted. Curry notes that, let me read this, one of the mysteries of craft in the book is how a novel written largely in scene has a plot that happens to depend on the past. Gatsby in the past went to war after winning Daisy's heart. He says that he never forgotten it. Joan Silber states, much fiction depends on people who never forget. This clinging, this refusal to get over it, is very useful in fiction. However inadvisable it may be in the real world. Fitzgerald's clever way of introducing backstory is intimate and poetic. Since there are many things the narrator, Nick, couldn't have known, one character might say, I've just heard the most amazing thing, which is heard by Nick. Whether he's being directly told or he's eavesdropping, he has the blanks filled in for him, then tells us the details as he goes along. Each moment in Gatsby is kept moving through a stream of events that arise to reach a point, a destination. In the end, Gatsby is dead. Daisy picks Tom. And Nick comes to his own conclusions about the entire affair. Nothing else can occur. This style, which we call classic time, exhausts the possibilities and plays out events in order for the story's meaning to arise. By comparison, if I were writing a similarly structured work about the fictionalized life of John Lennon, I could do something very similar. I could set it in the summer and fall of 1980. That would give me a definite point of entry and ending, his reactivation into music, and then his murder. In parallel, using an assistant to narrate would be a very clever vehicle for this story. And those things that the assistant couldn't possibly know could be achieved through a series of John Lennon's life overheard, whether he's telling stories to someone else or a reporter, or the person is like witnessing some kind of argument between him and Yoko. It would just make it something that would make it plausible that he could report upon it and know it even if he possibly couldn't. The assistant could be privy to the final fight that Yoko and John had about recording. Right after this, when he steps out of the limo, he could be there to witness the murder by Mark David Chapman. It can be built in classic style and is already a riveting set of real-life events. Let's talk about the next section, which is called long time. Seldom do the words we write correspond with life in real time. We may, by necessity, compress them. Real-life conversations, for example, would go on and on if they weren't edited for book form. So we try to corral and edit the large mess of images, smells, feelings, and words into a more concise and yet imaginative form. An excellent example of covering a long period of time in a short form is Anton Chekhov's The Darling from 1899. Coming in at a whopping 10 pages, it covers 30 years with aplomb. Chekhov follows the life of Olga, who seems to have no intellectual prowess of her own. Her identity is continually wrapped up with whoever she's in love. With her husband, a theater manager, she speaks only of the things in life that make him feel important, talking about ticket sales and the problems of maintaining the theater and the staff and whatever the play is that's going on. Then he dies suddenly, which throws her into a deep mourning until she finds another person to fall in love with. But this person in this time is the owner of a lumber yard. So then all of a sudden all of her talk is about lumber and about all of the technical things that go along with having a lumber yard. And he dies suddenly, which throws her also into another deep mourning state. So what they do next, what Chekhov does when he writes, is he then has the neighbors note that even though she's not talking about that she's involved with anyone, that she starts talking about pets in the neighborhood and how we need a really good dog pound and dog catchers and they need to be vaccinated and something like that. So what we find out is that then she's involved with a married man. The wife and the child have been taken out of the picture. The wife has left, but now she's with him. And that goes sour because he decides to move away and then reunite with his wife. It's not an ex-wife. So in that time, using that word, Olga transforms from being a beautiful young woman to a plump and fading older woman. When the veterinarian returns with his wife, she no longer wants romance, but starts doting on the son, which is at an age not to really care about being doted on by some older lady. Olga's destiny in this story is to repeat her own actions over and over again. As the story progresses, her situations change, so she does not. Her actions give her 2 happy marriages, but with time, such actions do not repeat. So how can Chekhov write about a character who doesn't change? His solution is to have her environment change around her. His use of episodic series, her repeated fixations, an application of lists instead of summary, give us an up-close intimacy even though he's jumping over a long span of time. If we were to do that in a story of John Lennon, you could write about his constant dissatisfaction in life, that right in the pinnacle of anything that was good, he would go through a depression, he would go through something to attempt to sabotage it, even through childhood. And we could go through his art college days when he was doing well, and he destroyed that. The peak of Beatlemania, he went through depression. As a group, he was doing things that brought anger and ire as opposed to everybody else in the band. His domesticity, his musical career, his marriage, everything, each of these moments would end with him attempting to sabotage the situation with varying results. Switchback time. Switchback, as coined by Silber, is described as a zigzag movement back and forth among time frames, the method of a fiction that alternates different eras like the deliberate swing of a mountain road that carries us this way and that when a straight line can't do it. There is no particular dominance between now and then and further back. Each have separate yet equal roles in the development of a story. Switchback time. Reingard Nethersole writes in his dense essay on the praxis of writing time, Bernard Stiegler's concept of the orthographic moment as necessary complement to numerical atemporality meaning timelessness. It is through working on and with words, exemplified in literature's notational iconicity, that we order the world, an order that is quite distinct from the numerical ordering of the world. Although both symbolic systems, a semiotic and a mathematical one, function as production and representation. Moving back and forth through time can give the reader a composite picture, and one that also gives meaning once the pieces have been put together, or as Nethersole says, an ordering of the world. So we often just love finding meaning in things, don't we? And it's always interesting to puzzle something together then when the pieces fit that composite. As you step back, you can see what's going on. Anne Patchett, in her work, The Magician's Assistant, zigs and zags through the past and the story's present to help the main character, Sabine, assemble who her husband, deceased magician Parsifal, was. It's written in third person, and we read that after the death of Fawn, Parsifal's husband, because he was a homosexual, Parsifal wants his assistant of more than 20 years, Sabine, to inherit what he has in life after his passing. So after he dies, she finds that he had lived a different life before he moved to Hollywood, a life that she had not known, that he had not even spoke of. He had said that his family was dead. So within this, she encounters, because of the reading of the will, the daughter and the mother. The unraveling of this mystery will be much of the remainder of the story. As they go back to the Nebraska home, they find like the daily rituals, scenes and stories about his childhood, how he had killed his father in defense of the mother. Sabine had assumed that when he was in the boys' home that it was because of his homosexuality, but in reality it was because of this violent, it wasn't really violent, it was defensive for his mother. She goes back to thinking about their life together, and the mother constantly plays every night this late 1970s video of Parsifal and Sabine doing their act on the Johnny Carson show. The flashbacks provide much of the information, even some which Sabine didn't understand as it was happening. Her infatuation and love with Parsifal blinds her to the fact that he was a jerk to her and most people around him. He was very self-centered. And we witness him doing many things to show that. Patchett's use of switchback time helps keep the story from a single point of view. Again, I use the word composite. In its end, the story has not only given Sabine a relatively complete picture of who her husband was, but also has given her a long, loving, reciprocal relationship that she never got with Parsifal, but it's with his sister, Kitty, who looks so much like him that it feels like it's him to her. Um, Using another aspect of a John Lennon type of story, it could be told in third person during the Lost Weekend, a period that spans from 1973 through the middle of 1974. Yoko kicks John out, tells him to go find himself. She sends May Pang, her assistant, with her, who he takes as a lover, but also May Pang's other job is reporting back to Yoko. During that period of time, he tries to relive his youth, even though he's in his 30s now. He turns 34 while he's in the middle of it all, and tries to remember the days of yore, and tries to sort out things. Why does he feel this way? Why is this way? It's a very, could be composite and back and forth. It even actually could end up with the meeting of he and Paul McCartney in early '74 in California, where they patch up their very battered relationship. Slowed time. Patchett uses switchback time to great effect, giving us the story from many angles. But there are those who aren't concerned with backstory. Ernest Hemingway and Raymond Carver were both happy to keep us in the present. Raymond Carver exemplifies this in his short story entitled Chef's Home. In it, the narrator gets a call from her ex-husband who wants her to return to him. He tells her that he's on the wagon, and she thinks in her head, I know about that wagon. That's all you get about his past, and yet it covers a lot of ground. We as readers infer that there are things that happened that weren't good. You don't have to tell us, but we know that whether it's her repeated failure in his sobriety or whatever might entail, the narrator is sure that she's seen that movie before. Silber tells us that the past is left out. The focus on the present moment can sometimes lead up to the intensity of what I call slowed time. A very short piece of action is examined very, very closely. In Nawal al-Saadawi's short story, The Thirst, time is slowed down as a servant girl lusts after a bottle of soda. I want to read this to you. This is really slowed down time. I think it's a really great example of it. It says, she drank with extreme slowness, moving her fingers down around the bottle and feeling its coldness with delight. She lifted it slowly to her mouth and touched the edge of her lips to the bottle mouth and licked it, gathering up all the droplets around it with her tongue. Then she raised her arm a bit higher till the tilt of the bottle touched her mouth slightly, only allowing herself a single sip of the rosy, ice-cold liquid. Here she closed her lips with great control, keeping the sip in her mouth for a while without swallowing it all at once. She swallowed it slowly until the last drop of it disappeared from her mouth. That is quite a drink. The servant girl who's watching her in the story wants a drink of her own, but she realizes that there is a cost for that because her master doesn't want anything like that. Even if she could scrape up the money, it's forbidden her, and she would face consequences. But in the end, watching this scene, she's overcome by the desire for it, so she gets it anyway, knowing that she could be beaten for it. It is noted that length is weight in fiction. Let's say that again. As we talk about something and focus on it, the length as we talk about it, it gives it more weight. It has impact on the story. The longer a writer focuses on an event, the more important the reader realizes it is. It can parallel with camera work in a film, but of course, we must beware that focusing on the wrong things will bring us out of the scene. If the moment has no bearing on the story, why did the writer waste our time with it? My John Lennon story for this would be about his writing of Strawberry Fields, one of my favorite songs. Having taken the part in the movie How I Won the War, John found himself for the first time in many years away from his wife, away from the other Beatles, in Almeria, Spain, filming this movie. His only companion was his chauffeur. We don't need to know about the band. We wouldn't need to know about the marriage or his first son. As in Raymond Carver's story, we could preface it with something that is a break from all the other pressures. And we would know probably better than that story, because I think if you know anything about the era of the Beatles, that things were going on. But we would hope that we could say something of equal importance so that you would know that he's there and there is a demarcation from his past. We can look at the hunting for paper, the colored pencils, the little travel desk, the tent in the middle of Spain where he stayed in between scenes, the sound of the wind, the feeling of nostalgia and loneliness. They could all be used to make a very intimate scene of John writing a song in a manner that he never had before, and wouldn't successfully do it quite that way again. So it would be a wonderful little short story, a little vignette maybe. Or you could expand it out, I suppose, if you take a really long time and slow everything down. I'd like to end up with Fabulous Time. I want to take us on a journey through science fiction, fantasy, magical realism type of things, where time doesn't have to be attached to us or realistic at all. This is something that has been in our folklore and in spoken stories for centuries and eons, I guess. Thus far, all of our time modes have been something that is to be believed as normal, like something that we could possibly encounter in the natural world. But whether it's Gulliver's Travels, The Martian Chronicles, Minority Report, or any Stephen Donaldson book, we encounter expanded worlds full of what Joan Silber calls fabulous time. She calls this from the word fabulation, meaning story invention with an element of fantasy. Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude is a well-worn example of bending and breaking time. Start with the first sentence. Many years later, as he faced the firing squad, Colonel Aureliano Buendia was to remember that distant afternoon when his father took him to discover ice. Silver Curry and Eileen Donaldson all note that this sentence contains past, present, and future. Silber writes, as a reader can almost tell just from the first sentence, time in 100 Years of Solitude is both circular and linear. Repetition occurs lavishly and constantly, in a fecundity of recurrence and return. A family tree is supplied in the front piece of the book to provide a key to the repeating names. Family members keep getting the names reused, such as Aureliano, Arcadio, and Jose. Within its 448 pages, we see the story circle around the opening sentence events in bits and pieces. It takes us till page 141 to see how the firing squad incident pans out. And then further we read of the father's amazement of the block of ice. To write a John Lennon story in this vein, we might have to place him in late 65 during the first encounters with LSD. We could talk about the story of Getting Better, where he goes to record that song and accidentally takes the wrong pill, which turns out to be lysergic acid diethylamide. And at the end of it, the session falls apart and Paul McCartney takes him home. And they ride in a yellow submarine. Isn't that familiar? The choices are available to us. When it comes to writing with this kind of thing, length of story, point of entry, and ending are identifiable. Classic time, long time, switchback time, short time, and fabulous time can give us multiple approaches. The final point is to realize that from our initial aha moment, we have the opportunity to place our story in an inventive universe that might make it a fresher story than expected. For me, not only is the story ended with me brimming with new ideas on how to approach things, but it has me wanting to think about doing some kind of John Lennon short story. Thank you for your time, and it's right at 30 minutes. Have a great day.